Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It is me, Jackson. To quote the preacher from the Simpsons movie, tonight we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to call on one of you. He points to the audience. So we decided last week we were going to do an open mic show, and we almost didn't have anybody. It lasted until yesterday. We finally found someone. So joining me tonight, I have my usual cast. We have Neslig and Peter joining me as always. And also joining us is Ben. Welcome, Ben, to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm not sure what I'm getting into here, but I hear it's nicer than some other shows. So,
well, we try, but we'll see, I guess, why is it not working? I don't like technology. Okay, anyway, I fixed it. All right. And Dapper is in the side chat instead of being here tonight. Sorry, Dapper. He called me a traitor on Twitter. Usually what happens is Dapper and I will talk to a creationist, but since this is a Thursday show like normal, I wanted to open it to Nestle because Nestle also, it's been a long time since I've had Nestle do one of these with me. I think the last one was it was a bit of orange, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, that was the I think that was the last one. Yeah, just many
that was
years
a few
ago.
years ago.
Oh boy,
Yeah, it was a long time ago. Are you familiar with a bit of orange, Ben? He's a little cartoon guy.
nope.
I don't believe he's
Eric Hovind.
Yeah. I don't believe he's maybe active lately either. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so. All right. Well, anyway. All right, Ben. Go ahead. Tell us about yourself. Welcome. What brought you here?
Well, the immediate efficient cause was Twitter. So, but in general, I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska. I went to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where I got a biochemistry degree. And then I've worked in a lot of labs and other random jobs since then. And currently I'm attending Biola University in their Master of Arts of Science and Religion program. So that's why I'm here and interested in all this stuff. I have a podcast called Macrophage Strategy. If you can spell macrophage, you're smart enough to listen to my podcast. So that's what I'm doing.
Okay. I listened to part of one of your episodes this morning. Your episode was titled 4 Reasons to be a Young Earth Creationist. I listened to part of that as I was driving to work. So I heard the first, I think it was 2 points on it. Didn't make it all the way to 4. I'm sorry. I got really busy.
Yeah, I should have been doing schoolwork this afternoon, but I managed to sneak in some of your older videos. So.
Oh, oof! Sorry to hear that.
No, they weren't bad. It's fairly good for YouTube content. So.
It's let's see. Oh gosh, it's been like I think we started a series back in like 20. It was like late 21, I think. Which we're still working on. So we've been doing it for like almost 3 years now, and we're.
You started it, Jackson. You started
well, okay. I mean, but we've all been working on it. Is what I mean.
Yeah.
We're 40 episodes into it.
That total? Like how many? Like so far we're like in episode 39, I think, right? So
yeah, we're on episode 39. I just started scripting episode 40. Yeah, after way too long. Okay. Anyway, okay. So I don't want to speak for you or try to represent your argument, so I'll let you have the floor. Ben, tell us your first and foremost argument that you would
or question.
Yeah. Or question, yeah. Whatever you'd prefer to start off.
Okay, well, I guess the sort of summary of my 4 reasons is just I think that historical records are more accurate accounts of history than historical science, and also easier to interpret. So that would be kind of the short version of my 4 reasons. But scientifically, I like to start by talking about the current, what I would say is the consensus creationist flood theory called catastrophic plate tectonics, because there's some evidence for it. Creationists realized a long time ago that there's not enough water to cover the whole Earth unless you change the elevations of the seafloor and the continents. And so John Baumgartner came up with this theory using a computer model called Terra that models the motions of the mantle, working at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and showed that if the oceanic crust subducts underneath the continents, what would happen is the hotter rock underneath would rise due to the decreased density, and that would push the water in the oceans up over the continents. And then in the mantle, there would be these oscillations where the continents and oceanic crust would kind of be jostling back and forth for a while, and that provides a good explanation for all the sedimentary layers and phases of the flood, the 6 mega sequences in the geologic column. And we've found giant cold spots near the Earth's core. They're about 1,000 degrees cooler than the surrounding mantle. And we think this is the pre-flood crust, the pre-flood oceanic crust. And Baumgartner's mechanism predicts that it would subduct all the way to the core based on a process that is in the secular literature involving rock, that if you apply shearing force to it and high heat and pressure, it would increase in density as the temperature goes up, which is opposite of normal behavior. But because it deforms the shearing force deforms the crystal structure of the rock, it increases the density as the temperature rises, and so it would be predicted to go all the way as far as it could go. And so the other thing with that is, if you have another explanation for those large cold spots, it would have to be something that occurred very recently, because if those cold spots had been down there a really long time, they would have had time to equilibrate in temperature with the rest of the mantle. So that theory has really gained predominance. I know on YouTube there's other theories that are popular, like Walt Brown's hydroplate theory, but those other theories don't have the kind of backing from PhD creationists that the catastrophic plate tectonics theory does. And it's mainly because of the evidence for it and the sophistication of the model. So along with that, another creationist physicist.
Can I jump in real quick, Ben?
Yeah.
So this is one of my pet peeves. When you say theory, do you make a distinction between the colloquial use and the scientific use? Because Walt Brown's theory isn't a scientific theory as such. I mean, that's
it's a hypothesis.
Yeah.
You can say it's a hypothesis. I'm okay. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
I'm not a fan of Brown's theory. It's extremely ad hoc.
Mhm.
It involves a whole lot of assumptions, where Baumgartner's theory, basically everything falls out of it, and from basically one assumption about somehow the subduction has to begin. That's the main assumption there, but virtually everything falls out of it. So I don't care what you call it, but it's not a good idea. I don't think it's a very plausible idea.
all right. Do you want to unpack more reasons, or is it okay with we can dive?
There's a lot in that one.
Yeah. We can perhaps dive into the catastrophic plate tectonics a bit, right? Is it okay with you, Ben? That we go into that point? All right.
So,
do you have any questions, Jackson, first, or can I jump in and ask something?
well, I mean, sure, Nestle, you can jump in.
Like you said it before, but you said something about like when the oceanic crust subducts, what is being pushed up again? The oceanic crust itself, or like, can you repeat that for me again? That point that you
Yeah,
said.
so once the oceanic crust subducts into the mantle, what is left behind at the bottom of the ocean is rock that is hotter than the crust was. And
Oh,
so
at the spreading center at the mid-oceanic ridge. That's where new crust is being made, right?
just
Yes.
like that. Yep,
Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah. All right. It's basically the same as conventional plate tectonics, except it's catastrophic. It happens within a few years, or maybe even a few months, basically.
Well, the flood took place over about the course of a year.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
So I'm
Yeah.
not 100% sure on the exact timing, but it would be in terms of
So
months. And so
okay.
we're talking meters per second, the speed at which the subduction
Right.
is happening.
Okay. I see what you're saying. So my question kind of immediately is: are you familiar with what's known as the heat problem?
Yeah, I
For
knew you were going to say that.
So I think you have to realize then that like there are no creationist proposals short of miraculous intervention that explain away the heat problem, right? I mean, we're talking about the movement of the continents, right? They sit on a mantle that's kept in like a, I don't know, what would you guys say is the best? Like it's not liquid, it's like I guess kind of like semi-liquid sort of. I'm not sure what the best terminology for that would be, but like this
The
is
mantle is technically a solid, but
okay.
it doesn't
Yeah.
Solid.
flow
Okay.
because it's hotter.
It's like
Right.
I've watched. I forgot his name again. Like it's a very YouTuber. Uh, uh, I forgot his name. But he says it's ductal. The
Okay.
the
I gotcha.
mantle is ductal. Like
Right.
it's like
Okay.
a very stiff Play-Doh. It can deform, but it's not a it's not a liquid.
Right,
It's like
right, okay.
yeah,
I got you.
yeah.
So sorry, I was
Mhm.
trying to figure out the best terminology for this. But like, and this is like occurring in part because of the like nuclear decay that's occurring like at the core of our planet, right? So like these are giving off massive amounts of heat. It's keeping everything really nice and toasty, and then we have our continents that are moving around atop like the upper layers of the mantle. And so like, how could this possibly occur on much more rapid timescales without just one having a mechanism that would allow for that to happen, but also two boiling all the oceans and therefore knowing everyone on it.
Well, the heat problem was noticed by Baumgartner right away, and it's in one of his original papers in the 1980s. So we've known about that for a
Right.
long.
Yes.
The mechanism, though, is what I said was there's experiments on this in the secular literature where the rock becomes denser as it gets hotter under shearing force, and that makes it more dense and it starts sinking faster. And then this results in a positive feedback loop where the faster sinking gets higher temperatures from friction, which makes it more dense and sinks faster, and that's why it goes all the way down to the core. So we think we have a mechanism. It's the heat problem is a problem with the theory, but there's a number of other advantages to it.
I
That's
mean,
why it's been successful.
that's kind of an understatement, right? Like even if I grant that I'm not I just want to say, cards on the table. I'm not a geology guy. I'm a biology
Neither am
Me,
I.
so like cards on the table, to say like this is a problem, like yeah, it's a problem. I mean, the rate team over at Answers in Genesis acknowledged, hey, we don't have an explanation for this at the time. I mean, you can go over to like Standing for Truth's channel, who is like one of the kind of, premier creationist channels on YouTube right now. I may not like the guy, but that's true. He certainly has one of the largest audiences. He gets people from AIG, CMI to come on his channel and talk about these issues. And none of them have explanations for how we could even reasonably deal with like a fraction of this heat that's being produced by the friction of the continents, as well as all the meteors hitting the planet and the radioactive decay, etc. All this like just seems to, even if we have a mechanism for how this can happen, the heat itself produced by this seems to instantly preclude it. Like, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand.
Okay.
It's a serious objection, and young Earth creationists have always taken it seriously.
Okay.
But it is a theoretical objection, and we think that there's so much evidence supporting this model that overrides the theoretical issues, and what we want to do is look for a theoretical solution to that. And this is very typical in science. You don't throw away a good theory because there's a single problem with it.
Well, I mean, that's not really a single problem. I think there are lots of other issues. Like, I would point immediately to index fossils as another like defeater for the global flood. I think there are lots of, and now index fossils are one thing I do have a bit of a handle on, because that's more paleontology stuff. But I would say that there are several issues that are on their own defeaters for the global flood. One of them being the heat problem. Now, if creationists are able to come up with some sort of method, now, I mean, in fairness, they could just say it was miracles, right? Like, they could just say, well, God just snapped his fingers and got rid of all the heat. Like, okay, that's theoretically doable, but of course, we've removed ourselves from the realm of science in doing that. But a different argument that I can explain a bit better, because it's more towards what I handle typically, is like index fossils. Are you familiar with index fossils?
Not deeply, no.
So,
But before you
sorry.
move, we
Okay.
can talk about this. But
Yeah, go
before you
ahead.
move on, this would be an issue with all global flood models, correct? That
Yes.
you're about to bring up.
Yeah.
So, in the young Earth creationist community, there are reasons why the catastrophic plate tectonics model is favored over other global flood models that I haven't gotten into yet. I only
Sure.
mentioned one
Sure.
thing.
Right.
But what you're about to bring up is going to be against any global flood model.
Yes. I mean, like, yeah, whether it's catastrophic plate tectonics or yeah, whether it's like continents are actually moving fast across, or they were in the same, or they were all in the same place originally, or vapor canopy, whatever. Like, whichever method we go with, yeah, the index fossil issue is going to be problematic for any of them.
Like even if you propose that like the water was magically appeared and magically disappeared without any there's no heat issue, you still expect to have evidence in like the fossil record as Jackson implies, basically, right? You would still expect to see something in the index fossil, but they don't seem to indicate those things.
Well,
Right.
you're going to have to be more specific.
So I can lay out the argument for you. I'll give you a sort of brief overview of it. So the concept, so an index fossil is it's usually either like plant pollen or small invertebrates that have shells, or tests, if you want to be more specific. And these fossils are correlated with very particular strata, and they have a particular chronological order. So you would find species A, all over the world for this one stratum, but it's nowhere below or above, because above it is a different species that you can also find all over the place, and then above that it's a different one, and again, and so on and so on. And regardless of where you go on the planet, and these sorts of fossils are used for like finding oil. So for geologists to go, okay, hey, this stratum is this many millions of years old because it has this particular index fossil in it, so that's where we should be searching for oil, not this way younger stratum that doesn't have those. And so if there were a global flood, there's no reason why we should expect that sort of order, that sort of faunal succession, to use William Smith's term, because, well, either we would say you could have, if like you have a, I know creationists kind of debate on where the start of the stratum is that was laid down by the flood, but wherever you want to start it, we would see in the rocks, okay, here's where we have time zero. Basically, we have the start here for the index fossils getting laid down, and then we can just go up from there. But we really don't see that. We don't see it either in terms of chronology, in terms of like species A, B, C. We don't see it just really anywhere. And so this seems to me to present a major issue for any sort of flood narrative. Does that make sense? Did I explain it well?
Everything up until the last bit. What are you saying we should see if there was a global flood?
So if the flood laid down the fossil bearing strata, which some creationists say like the the Precambrian is like pre-flood, and then post-Cambrian is flood, or what have you, whichever one you prefer. We should see a spot where we can start. We're like, okay, index fossils start here, and then we go up from there, right? Instead of like some start down here, some more start up here, a few more start up here, and they're just they start at different places.
Okay, that seems to conflict a little bit with the idea that we should not see ordering if there was a global flood.
So it's not ordering by size, it's ordering by species, though. Now, if it were size, creationists could obviously argue for like it was hydrologic sorting, right? But it's not by size.
Or density, yeah.
Or density, yeah. But like conodont elements most of them are pretty much the same size. A lot of phytoplankton are pretty much the same size. Like there's no meaningful way if you just drop these into water that they're going to get sorted by size or by density, because many of them are more or less identical.
Yeah, and so that's, I think, one of the reasons why catastrophic plate tectonics has become the dominant theory, is because it doesn't depend on hydrologic sorting for the minimum of order in the fossil record. So remember this is why I mentioned during the flood, where you have the oscillations that happen over and over during the flood, because it's sort of like if you jumped on a waterbed, you would bounce up and down for a long time, right? And that's what we think was happening between the continents and the oceanic crust. And so there was this period where the water is just sloshing back and forth over the continents. And we think this creates the order in the fossil record, because the first sloshes or tsunamis inundate the coastal areas, which are different ecological zones. And this means that the fossils that are laid down early on in the flood, you start out with mostly marine fossils, because that's where they start dying, is in the oceans first, because that's where the mechanism starts. And then as it slowly, the floodwaters rise as they're sloshing back and forth, but overall they rise throughout the flood. They cover and inundate and destroy different ecological zones based on first coastal areas, and then higher up and farther inland, and then finally the higher areas all the way in the highest hills.
Right, I see where you're coming from, but this also doesn't explain the order of index fossils. For example, grasses are very common along coastal environments. I mean, just go to the beach, you see grasses everywhere. We don't find any grass pollen at all until the Cretaceous, right? Like, and fairly decently into the Cretaceous. Whereas we see pollen from other plants, like different ferns, and gymnosperms and progymnosperms, way down in the fossil record. So that's not really explained by this model. It also really doesn't explain the distribution of the actual index fossils themselves. So for instance, these things don't overlap in time. So we find like this particular species of like flowering plant, whatever, and then when you go up to the next layer, you have a different species of flowering plant, but there's not overlap between those. It doesn't make any sense to say like, okay, it wiped out all of this one species of plant and then went back, and then it wiped out all of this other species of plant and then went back. Like, we don't see any anything mirroring that in like any catastrophic flooding that we have today. Like there's no precedent for that. You see what I'm saying? Like this doesn't make any sense given what we know about the world and about how ecology works in nature, about how ecological zones are constructed. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying, but from the beginning, we're proposing something that has never happened before and will never happen again.
I don't think that really rescues the objection, though. What I'm saying is, if the proposal is the waves are coming up, the floodwaters coming up, and it's wiping out these coastal ecological zones. Okay.
Basically, you're basically saying that the fossil, like the stratum, should be ordered with regard to how far inland it is, like
which we also don't see.
Yeah,
We also
exactly.
don't see that.
We don't see the gradient either. Like we like even at the top, we still have on the top layers, we still have coastal deposits like
And deep sea deposits.
yeah, and also deep sea deposits. Like one thing that I maybe not index fossils, but I know that like we don't see whale fossils except in the highest strata, and we only see like mosasaurs and plesiosaurs in the middle strata, and we also see many different marine fossils in the lower strata. So there are still marine and coastal species throughout. So there is no order in that regard. We still have these marine and
Yes.
coastal deposits
You have
throughout this.
what Nestling is saying is you have order by clades, by groups, by taxonomic
Yeah.
groups, but you don't have order by ecology, which
Yes,
it seems to be
there
what
is
you're
no
proposing that we
ecology, yeah.
should have
Mhm.
this sort of ecological zonation in the fossil record. Does that?
Well, to be clear, there would be marine fossils all throughout the fossil record on a
Well, we're not
global
arguing that there
model.
wouldn't be. We're not disagreeing with you on that. We're saying that they are, again, like the index fossils, they're in particular strata. So we only see trilobites, whether deep sea or shallow water, because we have both of them, only up to a certain area. And then above that, we have no overlap with like the marine reptiles, like ichthyosaurs, mosasaurs. And then above that, we have no overlap between those and whales, dolphins, hippos. That's what he's saying.
Are there examples of different taxonomic groups that do overlap in the fossil record? I'm pretty sure there are.
I mean, sure. Like, yeah, I mean, like anything that is contemporary with something else is an overlap in the fossil record. I'm just saying what
So
Nestle is saying for these marine organisms, you have no overlap, even though they occupied identical like zones
Yeah,
in the water column.
ecologies, yeah.
Yeah.
Shallow shore environments or deep sea marine environments, like
Yes.
we don't see an order in that regard, basically.
well, the way, and I'm not an expert on fossils, but the way I think they would respond is they would say that the ecology pre-flood is totally different than it is today. We don't think, for example, that there were mountains as high as the Himalayas in the pre-flood world.
Well, they don't have to be. I recognize I hear what you're saying. I recognize that, but we don't have to expect that either. I mean, the Himalayas are pretty recent in terms of geologic history. They're only within the last like what 50 million years, something like that. So they're pretty recent.
That's just an example. I'm meaning that there would be plenty of different ecological zones before the flood. There would be an entirely different climate on the Earth, and so we don't necessarily know that we can compare it directly to what we see today. So I think they would just answer, you know, we might have some work to do in terms of fleshing out the model. Perhaps some research grants would help with that. But my suspicion is they'd be able to come up with a model of the pre-flood ecological zones based on the fossil record.
Can I explain why I don't think that would work? Like, why I don't think that there are any like non-miraculous explanations for that. So one reason, like again, the index fossils, an index fossil is defined as an organism that has a very short vertical distribution, so it lived in a short time period, but has a very wide horizontal distribution. So you would have to explain why like conodont species or ammonite or whatever is on the entire planet for a snapshot of time, is immediately buried all over the planet with no overlap between the species above and below it. You would have to come up with like a new mechanism of how water works, which just saying there was a lot more water at the time, which I agree, a global flood would require a lot more water, but we know water doesn't work that way. We know like sediment deposition doesn't work that way. And just saying, well, there would be more water or more sediment, like that doesn't rescue any of these that doesn't rescue this narrative at all, this hypothesis. It just simply does not explain the distribution and the deposition of these organisms.
Well, first of all, we're not saying there would be more water. That's the entire point of the theory.
Well, that also doesn't help explain more the idea at all, because like if there's the same amount of water today, again, we know how water works. Water's not going to we don't see this ecological zonation. We don't see, I know you said you don't agree with the like hydrologic sorting or deposition by size or density or whatever, but like we don't see that either. We don't see any sort of deposition of either the sediment types or the sediments themselves or the organisms within them that either models a particular ecology. So like going from coastal to forest to more inland like deserts, whatever. We don't see that. There's a very wide diversity in terms of like sediment grains from layer to layer. There's no layering of that. So like it would have to be very, very rapid, like deposition, new organism, deposition, new organism, deposition, which I'm at a loss as to how like that could occur.
Well, that's in the model. So when the oceanic crust first starts to subduct, okay, the first thing that happens is a tsunami because of an underwater earthquake. Okay, and so there'd be like a big tsunami that would come in and inundate one area and deposit sediment and then go back out. Then there'd be another one and a long series of tsunamis.
Yes, right. I understand that, but
and
like
happen all over the world because
Yes.
it's literally the entire oceanic crust subducting at the same time.
Right. Okay, but you've seen a tsunami before, right? Like a tsunami is just a massive force of water that carries whatever's in it with it. It does not deposit like single species here, then right above it another species on top, and then not overlapping with another species. Like that doesn't happen. We just literally don't see that with how tsunamis work.
And we're also talking about like species that live in similar zones,
like phytoplankton.
We have some index fossils occurring at one place, living in the same, like for example, intertidal zone, and then later with another intertidal zone species. But somehow these didn't get buried together for some reason. Like it's
especially when they're occupying like the photic zone because they have to. They're phytoplankton. They have to do photosynthesis.
So I'm hearing that it is simultaneously evidence against this that there are only a single kind of animal in one layer, and also it's evidence against this that there are multiple kinds of animals in one layer.
No, we're saying there are not multiple. Like what we're saying is the index fossils. They're called index fossils because they don't overlap, right? They each identify a very particular time, so they are non-overlapping, and that's what we're seeing in the fossil record. You can have organisms like that aren't index fossils that lived several million years, like that happens, but what we're saying is for index fossils specifically, these occupy very particular time zones that don't overlap with each other, and that is what we're saying is contra the flood model.
If I understand what you're saying, I don't understand why that's such good evidence against the flood model.
Because these are organisms that existed across like the whole world, like one species of phytoplankton found all across the world for this one slice of time, right? As we understand it in the conventional geologic explanation, it's one slice of time. Without invoking it as a slice of time, we have to say, we still have to invoke it as time, just very, very briefly. Like this one species of phytoplankton was wiped out, but it occupies just this one layer on the whole planet. And then a separate second species was wiped out just on top of it. And then a third species was wiped out just on top of it. And there's no overlap between these like different species of like foraminifera or whatever it is we're looking at. And we don't know any mechanism by which that sort of sorting can occur. A tsunami does not explain that, because like if you look at tsunamis, they just kind of wash everything together. If we saw just a big mix, a jumble of foraminifera species and radiolarian species and all this, okay, if there was no way to say that this species correlates with a particular stratum, okay, there might be an argument there. But that's not what we see.
Well, we see a lot of that. It's just sometimes we don't. So,
maybe most of the times we don't. Yeah.
If I may, Ben, I have a question. I have a question for you about something you said earlier. You said that maybe if people would get grants, they could look into things more and maybe find out other mechanisms. I was curious as to what you think, why, because we have grants, people in all kinds of fields of science that could deal and speak on a global flood get grants. You have geology, you have paleontology, you have biology. All of these people, they get grants. Why do you think that none of these fields in science has come up with a global flood that approximately happened 4,300 years ago? Why don't they find the evidence? Is there a bias, and if so, why would there be a bias? Because we're talking about scientists from all over the world, different religions or the lack thereof.
Well, there is a bias, but I just listened to a podcast of a geologist named Ron Neller who came to believe, he was a flood geologist dealing with floods with river deltas, I think. And he actually came to believe in a global flood prior to becoming a Christian because of the geological evidence. There's a creation.com talk podcast recently he was on talking about that. So he did have grants.
What I'm saying is this is one guy as opposed to an entire scientific field with thousands of scientists all across the world, some of them religious, some are not. They have different religiouses. What would the bias be? What they have to all share one particular bias against one particular holy book. So what would this shared bias be, and why how could they sustain such a bias if the scientific findings aren't true?
Well, the one bias is methodological naturalism, and that has always cut against anything coming from the Bible. There is definitely a bias against the Bible being true, and has been since the 19th century, at least, if not before that. Usually what happens is someone will claim that the bias is justified because our position does not have evidence for it or something, or we're incompetent, or young earth creationists are incompetent.
I get that.
But of course, that's how you would justify it if it was real bias.
That's something I've heard a lot. The problem with that is that a lot of these scientists are Christians. So what would their shared bias be going against the Bible, going against a global flood, even though it is their holy book? They are Christians. Why would they be biased against the Bible?
You don't have to be a non-believer to be a methodological naturalist or to doubt the biblical account of origins.
I agree.
There are lots of Christians who doubt that. And I think that is bias. It doesn't matter that they're Christians. But this whole thing about truth by consensus, I don't buy it. The consensus has been wrong of experts in fields has been wrong all the time.
It's wrong basically because of a lack of information, right?
Yeah. How do you think consensus is established in science?
I probably have a similar view on that as you do, but I do think that
what do you think?
Philosophical ideas that if we're being all cards on the table here, I'm an instrumentalist in my philosophy of science, so I do think there are lots of non-rational factors that influence scientific consensus, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, and you can't really get away from it.
Sure, you can say there's like cultural bias in science. Gould talked about that back in the 70s.
That doesn't answer my question. But my question was, how do you think scientific consensus is established? What do you think the process is?
It's really complex. So I'm actually just now rereading the Copernican Revolution by Thomas Kuhn for a presentation I might be doing here. And his account of how even something that we think is really simple, like heliocentrism, supplanted the consensus of geocentrism before it. He thinks it's super complex too. And one of the things he talks about is the philosophy of Neoplatonism having an influence. And something that I completely forgot about was how Copernicus was even influenced by some really strange beliefs about the importance of the sun. So like something about how the sun is representative of God because it provides warmth to everything, and weird things that that Copernicus wrote about that like nobody believes today, but it gave him the courage to sort of say, look, I'm going to put the sun at the center, and try that model and see what happens. But there's all kinds of things that affect scientific progress. A lot of them are non-rational. An example, there's better examples. There's one example of from my philosophy of science book last semester that I can't remember right now. But one example I like to use is Johannes Kepler famously tried shapes for orbits that came directly from astrology. And so the question I ask is, what if one of those shapes had worked for orbits? Would anyone care if the idea came from astrology? As if it was the best one, why would we care where the idea came from?
Wouldn't we want
I see what you're
an
saying.
explanation
Like,
that is backed up by evidence? Wouldn't that be?
Well, I see what you're saying, Ben. I see where you're coming from. Like, yeah, Gould talked about that in one of his the first paper. I think it was the first paper on punctuated equilibrium. He talked about the oh shoot, like how some ideas had kind of stagnated, like the phyletic gradualism, because this was kind of like rote. We had this idea for a long time, and now he's proposing this, not necessarily new, but like a new take on an old idea, but it was rejected or it was not perceived well at first, in large part because this other thing was standard for so long, or like the fact that aesthetic mate choice for in sexual selection, the concept didn't really come back in like force until the sexual revolution of the 60s, right? So I get it. I see where you're coming from. I see what you're saying. Like, there are cultural factors that impact or that can impact science. It's not all robots in lab coats doing science, right? Yeah.
If I may, I would like to go back to the.
But yes, I would like to go back to
talking about
the.
from the, like I'm trying to remember the point that you said before that I was a bit surprised by. Like, at first you were trying to say like, oh, there's this oscillation of water happening between the continents and the ocean, and that's why you at first you said that, oh, I expect to see the organisms at the bottom, at the lower strata, being near shore organisms, and then above it more inland, and then above it further more inland, and then further more inland above it, like that. That's the first. At first you were saying that, but when we pushed back on that, then you started to say like, oh, well, we don't know the ecology, which is a bit strange, because now you're saying that there is no predictability basically about the order of organisms from your model, because you as you say, we don't know the ecology, therefore we cannot have any expectations regarding the order. Am I wrong about that, or can you clarify?
Well, I think that every scientific model is going to adjust to the data. That's what scientific models should be doing. And so a model like this, I think I might agree, is not going to give a really hard and fast prediction about ecological zones. What you would do with it is you would look at the fossil record and you would say, try to build the model based on that, and what you think that implies about the pre-flood ecological zones and how the flood proceeded. So you would want to use the data to build your model in this case. But I see what you're saying is that you want me to generate some predictions, and I'm not sure that the
So
model is
you are saying that there are no predictions that we can make yet, at least. We cannot yet make predictions regarding this. This is the zoning, basically, right?
I don't know of any, but again, I'm
All
not
right.
like Jackson. I'm not a geologist, so.
All right. That's
Um,
fair.
But
okay.
if you want, I can tell you about some predictions that were made and were confirmed off of
All right.
some of
Well,
this
were
stuff in
they
this model.
were they predictions or were they retrodictions? Like we had the data already, but now we have this new model that like interprets them in a more favorable light than we previously had.
I'm not
Is that-
sure if the cold spots that I talked about were a prediction or an
I'm also not sure.
explanation after the fact. I'm not sure about that
If anybody
one.
knows in the live chat, feel free to tell us if that was a prediction or a retrodiction because I don't know. I don't know. I
But I
can.
do know of some
Uh-huh.
predictions, yes. At
Um,
least two that I could talk about.
so like with conventional geology, for instance, there are lots of examples of like fossil organisms that were predicted before the researchers went out and actually dug for these things. Like Tiktaalik, I'm sure you've heard of it, is one of the most famous examples in which that was done. The researchers said we have we have this transition that occurred in this time period, or so it seems. And so we should go out to a stratum that matches this time period, and we should find something that's not quite an amphibian, but not quite a like a lobe-finned fish, something kind of in the middle. And they did, and they found Tiktaalik, and they've since found like Parmastega and Caectania and a number of others since then that also fill this gap.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
because I'm an instrumentalist, I'm not going to sit here and try to deny that or anything. I just don't think that predictions are proof. They definitely are evidence for your model.
Well, sure, I guess. I mean,
As long as you accept that there have been predictions that our model has made, which I could talk about.
I mean, again, it's like, but are these predictions or are they retrodictions?
I understood what you said, and
Okay.
I was going to give two
Okay.
examples of
Okay.
predictions that were made.
Okay.
So, one has to do with a model of polarity reversals in the magnetic field that Russell Humphreys came up with based on Baumgartner's
He didn't
model.
predict those though. I do remember that one. That was
I-
also.
Can you let me
Sorry.
finish?
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was not saying that he predicted polarity reversals.
Okay.
If I meant that, I would say it.
Okay.
So everyone agrees that there are polarity reversals because of the magnetic striping pattern, right? In the seafloor and other places.
Mhm.
What Humphreys predicted was using this model of, so the magnetic field is generated from an electric current, we think, in the core of the Earth. And these cold spots coming so close to the very hot core cause different convection currents and heat difference between the core and these cold spots. And Humphreys thinks that that's what caused the polarity reversals. But what this means is that the polarity reversals would have had to occur very rapidly, right? As opposed to the old Earth timescale where they would occur much slower. And so Humphreys predicted that there would be evidence of rapid polarity reversals. And he predicted what kind of evidence would be found or would be found. And that is that you would find the same magnetic striping pattern in thin lava flows. And the reason that is evidence for rapid polarity reversals is that thin lava flows take much shorter time to cool than the ocean floor. And so he predicted there will be these thin lava flows that you'd find this striping pattern in. And just a few years after he made the prediction, it was published in the secular literature. And they didn't know they were confirming his prediction, but they found evidence of polarity reversals that they thought initially could have happened in 2 weeks or less. And so that's a confirmed prediction of Humphreys' model of polarity reversals based on Baumgartner's flood theory. So that's one example. Another example is also from Russell Humphreys, who used a related theory of how the planetary magnetic fields formed to predict the magnetic field strengths of the planets of Uranus and Neptune before they were measured in 1986 and 1989. And the secular predictions were way off because they're based on a completely different theory. And the reason they're based on a different theory is that on an old Earth time scale, you need a mechanism to keep regenerating the magnetic field, okay? Because over time, the electric current would die down due to resistance. And so you need some kind of mechanism to keep the magnetic field regenerating for, 4 billion years or however long the magnetic field lasts. Right. And so they had this whole model called the heat dynamo theory of how the rotation of the Earth can transfer rotational energy to the core, and that will keep the electric current having energy added to it to keep it going. And they predicted magnetic field strengths for other planets before they were measured, and they were off by, I think, like 5 or 6 orders of magnitude, and Humphrey's predictions were off by a factor of 2, or within a factor of 2. And the other interesting thing there is that Uranus does not have a molten core, so they need a completely different theory for how Uranus even has a magnetic field, whereas Humphrey's theory works without a molten core because it doesn't require any kind of regeneration over time. So Humphrey's theory is also more parsimonious. So that's my 2 examples of successful predictions, at least with the earth science stuff. But again, I would agree that this doesn't prove that it's correct, right? It's just evidence for the model that makes it a legitimate model.
I'm like, again, I'm not a geology person. What I do know about magnetic reversals is that from everything I've seen, these tend to take millions of years, right? And like there's an entire field of paleontologists called magnetostratigraphy, in which you can correlate these stripes, across the planet, similar to like index fossils. And so, like, but these correlate together, right? You can date a particular magnetic stripe at one point, and then you can see the organisms that live between this one and another one. You can correlate that somewhere else on the planet. So again, like,
Jackson,
again, I'm sorry, I'm not.
Jackson, if I may,
yes.
may make a suggestion. I may make a suggestion. Okay. Wouldn't it be a good thing to get answers in rocks on the channel and maybe have them have a
yeah, but I mean,
conversation
we can't do that
with
right now.
No, not right now, but maybe in the future, because that might be a good conversation that Ben might be interested in as well.
I mean, like Jackson, I said, I'm not a geologist, so I'm just informing you of what the experts on my side of the issue are saying. So I can't technically evaluate this. I'm just telling you this is what they have said.
Dapper, so Dapper's in our side chat. He says there are millions of years between the reversals, but the actual reversal process is very rapid. See, I didn't realize that.
I'm not sure that's true. I have actually read a paper that actually suggested polarity reversals as a mechanism for the last major extinction event.
I would highly dispute that. There's in 65 million years ago, that one?
Maybe, I'm not remember, but the point is that they seem to be assuming that the reversals would take long enough where the magnetic field would be very weak for a very long period of time in the middle of the reversal, and it would be enough to significantly reduce the oxygen content of the atmosphere.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've never really seen any evidence. I've never seen any good evidence for that causing a mass extinction. Like maybe a minor extinction, possibly, but like for any of the major mass extinctions, I've heard that, but I've never seen any any like well-received papers that that argued that.
Yeah, that may be true, but my only point is that they were seeming to assume that polarity reversals took a really long time. That was my only point.
Well, there is a long time between the reversals.
Yeah. Like the reversal, it's like the shift from one polarity to another polarity happens fairly rapidly, but the intervals between those shifts can be very long, basically.
Well, that's why I mentioned this paper, is because the mechanism they suggested depended on the magnetic field being really weak for a long time, and it would only be weak in the middle of a polarity reversal. So they were specifically assuming that the polarity reversal itself would take a very long time.
Well,
I would just question. Again, I'm not an expert on that, but I'm not willing to just accept that explanation.
Now I'm curious.
Science Side Up points out, who is a climatologist in our side chat, long period of time relative to a person, short period of time for rocks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but you guys think that rock layers are like hundreds of millions of years, so.
But there is one problem I have, like I can perhaps point out, is that you, as you said about the catastrophic plate tectonics theory, is basically suggests that the entire, or most, or maybe even the entire oceanic crust is basically the same age, right? That the entire oceanic crust, it's basically all new and it formed during the global flood. But we also see these magnetic reversals within that oceanic seafloor as well. So if the entire seafloor was overturned and then a new seafloor was solidified during the global flood, we would expect to have the same polarity throughout the whole oceanic crust. But we don't see that. We see bands of one direction and then another band of another direction, basically showing the reversals happening at different sections, basically in the oceanic crust. You know, like I think you're also familiar with that, right? The
seafloor spreading, but we would just say it happens the same way as you guys think. It just happened faster during the flood.
But it takes time for the oceanic crust to solidify, right? It doesn't happen so fast that it can like lock in these rapid reversals again and again. It takes time for the crust to solidify. And because the entire crust, the entire oceanic crust, to be specific, is basically the same age, then everything would have to have the same polarity basically because of that.
Yeah, I'm also a little bit confused because you said the change in polarity takes a lot of time, and earlier you said that you have in lava you have multiple reversals, which would mean that it happened rapidly.
Well, he is saying it happened rapidly.
I think it did happen rapidly. I'm saying on the old Earth model, it happened not rapidly.
But you just said that. You just said that it caused one of the extinction events because of how slow.
Well, he was saying that's a hypothesis that has been proposed by people who accept the theory.
Okay.
That's what
I don't accept that.
Which, I mean, in fairness, I don't think any of us do either. I think that
right.
That doesn't sound real, or that doesn't sound correct, based on what I've read.
I mean, it sounded like a speculative theory.
It was, yeah. I mean, there all kinds of stuff like what is it, like a pulsar or something caused like the Ordovician extinction, stuff like that. Yeah, very very speculative things of that nature. But at any rate, well, it has been an hour, and I don't want to take too much of your time. I do appreciate you coming on and talking to us. And so, are there any final things you want to say?
Just thanks. You guys lived up to the billing, and you were very cordial, and I appreciate that. So I have definitely been on worse YouTube shows. So.
Well, thank you again for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. All right. I accept the compliment, although it's not a very high bar to say the least.
No. And to be fair, this is a lot more helpful, because why would we fight? What would it add to the conversation.
Sure.
There is no reason for that.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, and I've been doing these kinds of arguments online and in person for a long time, and what I have found is that most of the time when there's people like us who are willing to speak publicly on an issue, our minds are made up. Like, we're not going to change our minds. And so it's kind of pointless to try and persuade people. So if we do
You'd be
conversations,
surprised.
oh, okay.
Um,
But if we do
if I,
conversations like this, I think the best goal is understanding each other's
Yeah,
position a little
Sure.
better.
Sure,
yeah,
absolutely.
I was also about to say that. Like, my goal is not to like change your mind. My main goal is to like improve your understanding and my understanding. Like, like after the fact, as long as you understand the subject, believe or not. Like, I don't care. Like, if you like, I would rather you not believe something rather than you believing it while not understanding it, basically. If you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah,
If you
no,
don't, yeah,
that's
yeah,
fair. And
yeah.
I think that's very educational. And I'm genuine about this. Like, I really do enjoy talking to people of different points of view, like genuinely. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you again.
Thanks for dropping by, Ben.
Sure. Do I just leave
Yeah,
or
yeah,
how does
you
this
can.
work?
Yeah, you can.
Mhm.
You can just drop off.
Oh, there it is. Okay. All right.
Okay.
See you guys later.
See you later.
Peter's
Do we have the new guest coming up for the next hour, or what are we going to
I
do?
had to wait
they want
until
to.
I had to wait until this one dropped off. So I'm sending the link out right now, so he can come on.
Yeah. Mhm.
I have to say this. This is pretty rare for hearing arguments like this as their main reason for creationism, because
I was pretty impressed actually, because like when I pushed back on like the like when he basically admitted that, oh, we don't understand the ecology, so we cannot predict anything. So when I pushed him on that to basically admit that that he has no model to predict the zoning, he was honest. He was honest and admit that he
Yeah.
doesn't have an answer for that. So I applaud him for being open about that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello. Welcome.
Hello, can you hear me?
yeah, we can hear you
Yes.
loud and clear.
How are you?
Yes,
Jackson?
loud and clear.
Before we start,
Fantastic.
what do we call you? I mean, we could call
Yes.
you Rust, but that doesn't sound nice. So how should we refer to you?
Sure, yes, so my name's John.
Oh yeah, you
I'm
said
from
that.
New
That's
Zealand.
yeah, stupid because you
That's okay,
just
yeah,
you
sorry.
said that in DM.
Uh,
Good to meet you, John.
I should have put my name up, sorry.
Yeah, no
Yeah,
problem.
thank you for inviting me. Very interesting show, and interesting to listen to the previous guest as well. So a bit about me, if you want me to share.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm from New Zealand. I run a website and rustministries.com, and so my background is in engineering and data science, and very simply, what I believe and my position is that I believe that God is real and that the Bible is true. And so, roughly about 2 years, 2 years ago, I became a Christian. Certain things came into place, and it's been an interesting process of learning more about the truth, or different truths around that reality, and then also something, and this is what I want to share, or what I'm interested in sharing, is specifically around belief systems and the nature of belief, and then our assumptions that those beliefs are based on. And
Uh,
I think that's
Hold on one moment. Like people in the live chat are saying that your voice is a bit loud, but I can hear you loud and clear. I don't know what's
John
going
is a little
on.
quiet. He's a little quiet. Maybe if he could be
To,
boosted a
to,
little
to
bit.
me, it's not.
Peter?
To me, it's not.
So I upped the volume just a little. So if people in the
Okay.
chat want to let us know if they can hear John right now, because to me you're all on about the same level. So
Okay.
great.
Everybody in the live chat, if you can't hear it, turn up your mic. I don't know, or your speakers. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry for the interruption, John. Go ahead.
No problem, no problem. And so I think that's how you found me, Peter. We're having this morning we had quite a big discussion about evolution and
That-
specifically
That wasn't
the
me.
scientific.
That was me. So you talked to Cypher on Twitter,
Okay.
because I think Cypher introduced you, at least on my timeline, and I just saw you, I think, about an hour and a half ago. So
Right. Okay. Yes. And so specifically, and this is what I'm interested to see what you guys think, or see your response, and perhaps the response of your chat, to what I, in my mind, seems to be a very succinct and very clear kind of position of what is true, right? Because there's two positions, and so, for example, and something I like to do is I mean, we want to start on ground that we can agree on, right? We want to make sure we're all on the same page, and so so let me just bring out an example that we can all obviously agree on.
Okay.
Is that and that this is that we exist, right? We exist, and that the world exists.
Yes.
So
Okay.
this is kind of like a self-evident thing that we're all can agree on. And then, so from the fact of our existence, right, we have two options. Ultimately, we have what I understand to be the kind of atheistic position of that the cause of this existence is a non-creator or a random or an appeal to chance. Would that be fair?
I mean, I guess it depends. Like I don't for biology. I mean, that depends on a lot of factors. I mean, chance plays a role in it, but I wouldn't say chance is like the only thing. It
Yeah.
does play a role.
Yeah.
I would also limit it to two positions, because there are multiple positions. There are multiple creation stories, multiple gods involved. So limiting it to two would still not narrow it down a lot.
Yeah, so the reason why I do that is because ultimately it is a black or white in a certain position. Whether the reality or the existence of a creator exists or not, in terms of, I mean, who that creator is, that's the different story, right? I think very simply we can, if you go to the position of is there a creator or is there not a creator, then it kind of clarifies all the kind of confusion around possible different religions and things like that. That's a different topic that we can talk about.
I
But
don't
I
usually
think
talk about religion on this channel typically. I usually just keep it to the science.
yeah, and so yeah, this is what I'm very
Okay.
interested in, and so specifically, like, so one of the core, I guess, propositions or logical propositions of the view or the world the Christian worldview is that existence itself is evidence of the creator. And so if you're talking about evidence, the creation itself is the evidence of the creator, and this is something that the Bible itself comments on and indicates. But then, and so basically what I was talking about this morning, and what I have published is basically a very short and very clear debunk of evolution. And so using science to debunk claims of science, right? So the evolutionist appeal is an appeal to science, right? Using science as kind of an appeal to a pseudo authority or because we believe, like, science, like the idea of science is an appeal to what's true, right? And so just calling something science doesn't mean that it's true. There's a deception in that little area. And so very simply, evolution theory, right? My claim, which I'm happy to present here, is that it violates physics, and it violates physics very simply in the on the topic of entropy.
Oh
So
Mhm.
no,
yes,
it
No,
doesn't.
no. It's Jackson.
I'm
Just
sorry.
let
I'm
him
sorry. Okay. All right. All right. Keep
finish
going.
first.
Sorry. My bad. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, let him finish first. Yeah.
Sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. And so this is why I'm really interested in this, because I think historically, or people have not been able to argue this position all the way through, possibly from a lack of understanding of the physics. And that's why it's been very interesting and entertaining as well to argue this position, because it's
And
such a simple position that is such a simple debunk, and then to argue it from recognizing all the common misconceptions, because there's a lot of common misconceptions around this concept, because basically what we're talking about is the laws of physics, right? A theory that violates the laws of physics, because you've got a theory that's claiming one thing, which is in opposition to what is established science, what's proven science, and very basic science.
I'm curious. So because you said evolution relies on science, it might be good that you explain to us what you think science is.
So
I
I actually want to
actually,
tackle his argument
yeah,
straight on. I'd rather
yeah,
tackle it
yeah,
straight
yeah,
on.
yeah.
So first of all, like, could you define, like, when you say it like violates entropy? So can you define for me what entropy is, just in like simple layman's terms?
Yeah, so very simply, it's just the tendency towards disorder, right? I can give an example of it's something you can observe in everyday situations, similar to how we can observe gravity. And so, very simply, if something's not being acted upon, then it will tend to become disordered. Like
Okay.
our bedrooms are a good example of that, or any system can be an example of that.
Okay. So,
Yeah, that's
yes,
okay, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. Go ahead, Nestle.
Oh no, you go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, okay, so entropy is the tendency of a system towards disorder, right? Like there's like a certain number of ways that energy can be like distributed in the system and all that, and uh, as energy is used up, there's only a certain number of like states the system can take, right? Um, but does entropy just like happen, or are there ways by which we can, uh, you know, reduce the entropy in a system?
Yeah. So entropy is a law of physics, right? But it can be worked against, right? Just so gravity is a law of physics, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible to lift anything up against
Oh, we're
gravity.
getting that's not entropy. Oh, well,
And so,
would someone want to give us a definition of entropy in the live chat then?
well, I can give a scientific
Go ahead, Miss.
description of it if you want to.
This is the thermodynamic quantity representing the unavailability of a system's thermal energy for conversion into mechanical work, often interpreted as the degree of disorder or randomness in the system. So a lack of yeah.
Yeah, that's a generally good one. Um, it's a great thing, It's a fantastic I think fantastic proof, because what we're really talking about, I mean, ultimately, I mean, we're all here today talking to each other, right? And I kind of perceived from the previous discussion that you guys seem genuinely interested in what's true, right? Because we don't want to become fools. We don't want to be believing in something that's not true. And that's where I think science, or an appeal to science, or using science, is a great common ground, because it's something that we can all appeal to and understand and
Right.
work with. And that's where that's where I think entropy, the entropy argument against evolution is a very strong one, because it does seem to contradict completely.
Okay.
So
Can I
let's
jump in for a
talk about
moment?
why it doesn't, right? Because like this is happening. So according to this definition, this is like the unavailability of a system's thermal energy for conversion into mechanical work. But we can increase the amount of like energy in the system, right? Like thermal energy. We can put energy back into the system, which is then working against entropy, right? Like that's what the sun does. We can. It's constantly putting
Maybe Jackson, maybe it's helpful if
thermal
John
energy back into the
explains
system.
how entropy is working against evolution.
Okay, sure.
That might be because I still don't see that, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So specifically, how entropy works against evolution theory.
Okay.
So if we can just start simply by thinking about what evolution theory claims, right?
Okay.
Evolution theory. Yeah. So evolution theory claims that over time, that biology will tend or become more ordered or more complex and have
Mm.
Not
because it's a
necessarily.
theory. Well, yeah, I understand that there's different positions, but because fundamentally evolution theory is a belief or an assumption to explain why there is a variety of life, right? Why is there complexity of life? And so it's from a position, and I understand that this is not the core of evolution theory, but ultimately the theory does indicate or predict um, something called abiogenesis or the
It
naturalistic.
doesn't though. Evolution doesn't predict that. Evolution is
It's
agnostic
part of the.
to how life originated.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to argue from that position. So if we assume a first replicator, right, then even from that position, it still doesn't explain how that first replicator became or adopted more genetic information. And so that's where I'm happy to argue all the different positions because
I mean, that's what
one of the
mutations
different.
are.
Yeah, so that's one of
I
the
would be.
common.
I would like to
If
go
I
back
can.
to like the. Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
if you want
sorry,
to
if I can
finish
just
first.
quickly address the
Yeah,
mutations.
let's
It's
finish
really
first. Yeah.
important.
Mm.
Yeah, it's really important because there's been a conflation. A common area of confusion on this topic is that evolution theory, Darwinian evolution, has been conflated with genetic variation. And so genetic variation, that is in the
No,
area where mutations have been which are observed. There's a conflation there, and so I'm happy to go into detail more about
no,
that.
that's
But
not what evolution means. So evolution is not conflated with genetic variation. Genetic variation is a part of evolution. I mean, if you really want to break evolution down into like, what did Darwin think evolution was? Like he would say evolution was variation, heredity, and selection, right? But it's not variation on its own, it's not heredity on its own, it's not selection on its own. It's all three of these together that are evolution, at least for Darwin. And of course, there's way more than that, today, but that's the very basis of it.
yeah, I mean, the problem with that is that it's not accounting for the entropic reality or the like. What I mean by that is that
Okay.
variation or natural, sorry, like observed. I mean, what we observe and what's commonly conflated with evolution theory in terms of being natural selection or sorry, genetic mutation. Um, that's that obeys the laws of entropy. That doesn't violate the laws of entropy. And very simply, just one, very simply. So if I can just read this from my article, I say people also often conflate genetic variation with evolution theory, but the driving forces of genetic variation, being natural selection and genetic mutations, only account for number one, changes in genetic expression, and number two, losses of genetic information in
No.
accordance with in accordance with the law of entropy.
Okay, but that's just not correct though. It's not just
Like-
it's okay, so you said it only accounts for changes in expression and loss, but that's simply not true. I mean, we can look at gene duplications, for instance. We can see that like I mean, you can take an enzyme or the gene for some enzyme that does one thing, and then it can accrue, mutations that allow it to do a separate function. That's called neofunctionalization. I mean, we've like literally witnessed gene duplications in like bacterial populations, for instance. Like Richard Linsky's E. coli experiment is one of the most popular examples. Nothing was lost, and it wasn't just a matter of okay, we're expressing this more or less. There was an actual gene duplication that then conferred a novel phenotype.
Yeah, so I mean, this is where you have to be careful because I understand that phenotypes are that's that you're talking about expression, which can be which does change depending on what the DNA is, right?
I mean, sure,
But what
expression is
I'm
part of
meaning,
it. Yes.
yeah, but what I'm meaning is it kind of goes in. I mean, because my background is in like data science, it does from a like informational theory point of view. When you have mutations, and I know this is kind of a weird thing, and so this really is maybe a tale or sorry, a sign of for example, someone that looks at a cup and says it's half full, and someone that looks at a cup and says it's half empty, right? So if you say that a mutation is a loss of information or a gain of information, um, then it's like it's a different perspective, right? Because if you, I mean, I
Well, we'd
don't
have to
understand.
define information in that context.
Yeah, exactly. And so if
So
we,
could you do that?
well, yeah, I think very simply, information is
Okay.
defined by the word itself, right? Information, right? So the word information, like the word formation, is describing an order, right? And so information is an ordered sequence of something, right? Anything can
Okay.
be informed.
Sure, some kind of sequence. Okay.
Actually, that is actually a misconception. Like even in like Shannon entropy theory, a random sequence has the highest information content rather than a repeated. Like if you have a simple repeated sequence, then it has a lower information content.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a certain perspective, I can understand how that's true, but the problem is that that's not functional. It's not functional because you're talking
Yeah,
about
but
something that's random,
Well,
and
okay,
ultimately
you are
something that's
changing
random.
the concept now.
right.
Like
It
first you
seems
talk
like
about
right. First it was
completely
entropy, and now
information.
it's function. Right. It has to be one of like if these concepts are related, then clearly functionality would have to be part of information because it seems like you started with information, and now you've kind of moved to a
Yeah,
separate
well,
issue.
But
no, let me.
maybe,
I can quickly just clarify that. So let's
Okay.
imagine a string. Let's imagine a string of, I mean, a string of characters, and they're all the same character, right? Like they're all like the letter G. And then let's imagine another string that's the same length, that's all random numbers. Both strings don't tell us anything, right? There's like if we're trying to read them, they both don't tell us any information, any value, right? So that's what I mean.
Okay, so let's apply this to the example that I gave, for instance. So, like, we have a gene duplication that confers a novel phenotype. Would you say that that's more information than what was previously there when there was not this phenotype?
Yeah, I mean that's so you're talking about gene duplication, right?
Hmm.
And so there's no you could and duplication means a copy, right?
Yes, so it's a copy of a sequence, but by having a second copy of the sequence and moving it to another location, like putting a tandem, they're right next to each other, you end up generating a novel phenotype. So they're doing a metabolic process under a certain set of conditions that they couldn't
uh,
do
the, fu-
previously.
the functional context changed, or at least like an
Right.
additional functional context was added, basically. Yeah, that's perhaps a better way to term it. But I like oh yeah, before I like you can respond with to that. But later would like to go back to the concept of entropy and unpack it later. But first, you respond
Okay.
quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean I guess my response would be that the phenotype, that's something that's different. You're looking at things at a different level than the actual genes,
Well, that's what
because
genes are
genes.
doing.
Yeah. So genes express the phenotype, and so changes in genes they result in a changed phenotype, but that doesn't necessarily uh, what I mean is that doesn't necessarily we're looking at two different things. Um,
So
yeah.
information does not have to do with functionality then, because the functionality of the gene is expressed in the phenotype. Otherwise, I don't know what. Then it seems like the concept of information in the context of genes is detached from functionality.
Yeah, of course. But for
Okay.
example, you can have a gene that contains multiple phenotypes, but only certain ones are actually enacted, right? So you have like dormant genes and things like that.
So would you? Well, would you? Okay.
Like
so
the insulin gene is turned off except in the pancreas, for example.
So-
yeah.
I think
But
I see what you're saying.
But before we move on, like if I may, I would like to go back to the entropy thing and unflash that, because there are some issues I have with how you frame entropy. Like obviously, like in high school physics, entropy is often described as a measure of disorder, but there's actually a very, like, if you unpack this, there's a very glaring problem with that. For example, a more accurate way to describe entropy is you have a simple system, and the simple system can have like X number of different configurations. And you can, like, from the at a microscopic level, but at the macroscopic level, you have fewer configurations. For example, let's say 2 pieces of dice, for example. And when you roll the dice, you can have a possible combination is 2 1s, and which is very unlikely, and 2 6s is also very unlikely. But the most likely macro state is throwing 7, basically, in total. Like you have many different ways the microscopic states can configure themselves into the macro state of 7 in total. Are you with me so far?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the number of ways, or the number of ways you can get a 7 is larger than the number of ways you can get a 2 or a 12 with the 2 rolling dice. And that is why the numbers, the macro state of 7 is higher entropy. There are more ways to produce that macro state as opposed to a different macro state. That's basically a more fancy way to describe entropy. The more likely state is the highest entropy, the more likely state. Are you with me so far?
Yep.
All right. But the problem with equating the more likely state with disorder, like it's a very intuitive concept, because we tend to think like, oh, disorder is more likely to occur than disorder, but sometimes it is not the case. And I would like to also, there's one interesting researcher called Sharon Glotzer, and they show that under certain circumstances, the most likely macro state is high order, basically. The highest entropic state is the one with the most ordered structure. So you can, if you're interested in that.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me, because high entropy means high disorder. Is that not true?
That's my point. You cannot equate high entropy with disorder. That's my point.
It's an analogy, but it's not a great analogy, is what he's saying.
Yeah.
That's why you
yes.
can't. It's
Like-
not.
like
It's
in-
not equal. The concept of like
Yeah.
disorder and entropy are not equal to each other. Like one can be.
Yeah.
Entropy can be framed as disorder, but this is a
misconception.
right, or like a more like sort of introductory way to look at it, rather than how it's actually viewed, is what he's saying.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm happy to quickly just touch on that, because this is important, because it's, I mean, the thing that I would really say on that is that entropy is, the concept of entropy, or specifically the second law of thermodynamics, it was discovered within the discipline of thermodynamics, right? But it's something that applies to all systems. All systems have entropic kind of.
Not
Sorry?
every system. Not every system.
So like it doesn't apply to Earth, right? It applies to the whole universe, but it clearly
it
doesn't
applies-
apply to Earth.
No,
it applies
that's
to
where I disagree.
closed system. It applies to.
I mean,
closed
you can't really
system.
disagree. We have a constant input of thermal energy, both from the sun and in some cases
Yeah.
from the
Okay,
core of the
well,
Earth.
Again,
Okay, well, let me please address those two.
oh, yeah, sure, yeah.
So there's two very important concepts, and just clearly, I know that you disagree, obviously, but just clearly, these are the two most common misconceptions on this topic. And so very quickly, to start with the concept of system or system boundaries. So the idea or the concept of an isolated system only exists theoretically. It only exists in theory, and for physicists, when we're making calculations, it's called it's an assumption that we use to make calculations more simple, because basically what it's doing is it's limiting the number of variables that we consider. And so there's a great picture. I can't share. I don't know if I can share it, but there's a great picture just about how entropy. Oh, sorry, describing the law of entropy. And within itself, there is, I mean, it's hard to explain without showing the picture, but but very simply, another one I can maybe explain is, so people often misinterpret the law of entropy, claiming that it can only apply to isolated systems. However, there is no such thing as an isolated system in the real world, because an isolated system is only a theoretical assumption that's used to make physics
Well, I mean,
calculations. And
you
so,
could say that about anything. You could say like
it's
the ideal gas law doesn't apply to anything because there are no perfect vacuums. Like, well, yeah, okay. I mean, sure, but the
yeah,
point is like you're when you are like doing the math, like for the most part, uh, okay,
like
I'm sorry. You see what I
if I
mean?
may, like we like today you accept that Earth has a biosphere. It has life, and life continues on. It maintains its uh order, basically. Let's for now assume that entropy equals disorder, which I don't agree with, but for now let's assume that life maintains its low entropy. But the reason why life can maintain its low entropy is because life, by and large, receives low entropy energy from the sun, and it uses that to dissipate low entropy back into the universe.
yeah.
That's
So
how
this
it
is a
that's how it maintains low entropy. The
so
life.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that's the second most major misconception. Very quickly, the idea of low
That's not a
entropy.
misconception that happens. That's not a misconception that happens. Yeah.
No, it does.
Do
It
you
doesn't. If you
deny
can let me explain.
do you deny photosynthesis happens?
Of course not. No,
I'm,
but
I'm,
let me very quickly
I'm
show
more
you how you're
curious.
wrong.
I'm
Okay.
more curious, John, because you just gave the perfect reason why entropy is not has no effect on evolution. Because if there are no closed systems, then life isn't a closed system. So entropy can't have any effect on life because it only has effect on a closed system.
Yeah. So that's the problem with that, Peter, is that it's a definitional fallacy, and so you're misunderstanding the definition of entropy, and then applying that to suit or to enable the
I
theory
don't
of
think
evolution.
I don't think that
Um,
Nestle is like. I mean, we gave the definition earlier, right? Like, we didn't give like an analogy for the definition. We literally gave the definition earlier,
And you
which
and
was
you
like,
I gave a short description of entropy. It is the number of microstates corresponding to a macro state.
yeah, but Jackson
Basically,
read the
the number of
definition.
ways.
Jackson read the definition, and John agreed with the definition.
I mean, the so like I'm a word like oh, what's the term like what I'm trying to think of a good word for it. Or anyway, the way that I use words is like if we have a different definition of something that we want to use that is useful, I'm perfectly fine with using that other word to describe said thing.
mm,
But like the when we use the term entropy, we're talking about a particular thing that like exists in like the field of physics, right? And that's what we've been talking about. If you're like, well, I have an issue with the way that this word is used, but you have like an actual definition that
I don't have an
is
issue with that. No.
okay.
I mean, I don't look. I'm happy. Look, that's why I look. This is all scientific. So I'm using mainstream scientific definitions of entropy.
Okay.
Now, very quickly, and just to show you how that there is a wrong level of wrong thinking here. You claim that on the topic of the sun, right? You claim that the sun provides low, or that the
Entropy
energy
and
from the sun.
energy.
Yeah.
It's low entropy.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and so So people often claim that evolution theory doesn't violate physics because of the energy from the sun. However, physics
No,
proves that.
I'm to quickly correct that. It's just like right now. That's for sake of argument that evolution is wrong. I'm just applying to the way life maintains itself right now. Like the whole biosphere basically maintains its order or low. It maintains low entropy state, right? That you can like you cannot deny that life maintains itself right now, right?
Yeah, every creationist agrees with you on that.
Yeah. So in the way it is able to maintain a
Yeah.
low entropy state is because it receives low entropy energy from the sun and
No,
dissipates that into
there's no such
that's
thing as
how
low
it
entropy
maintains.
energy.
Oh,
No,
well, it
there's.
is.
Let me. Well, if you could just let me just clarify for you. There's the concept of low entropy energy is a total misconception. So let me just share quickly. Um, Physics proves that an increase in energy into a system always only increases its disorder. For example, coffee dissolves faster under hot water versus cold water, and so this is like very practical, basic science that proves that when energy goes into a system, that energy increases the disorder of that system, or in other words, that it increases the entropy of that system. That's why claiming that the sun, that we get energy from the sun, therefore evolution can happen on Earth, it's a total wrong argument.
I'm not.
It seems like you're just kind of
I'm not.
misunderstanding. Like I
I'm
just
not
looked
saying
up. Does the sun provide low entropy energy? Like literally every.
it is. Yes,
It's
it
yes.
does.
Like it's okay. So
Like
here,
the
let me
So
see if I can.
wait, let me get that
Wait,
straight.
wait,
So
wait, wait,
you're
hold on.
appealing to Google?
So look, let me just read this. Solids have the fewest microstates and thus the lowest entropy. Liquids have more microstates, since the molecules can translate and thus have a higher entropy. When a substance is a gas, it has many more microstates and thus have highest energy. Does that sound right? Yes.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah. It's like when you cool
okay.
when you cool liquids, it tends to decrease the entropy. Like ice is like ice crystals is a very low entropy configuration. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Okay.
Yeah, so very simply, if you have energy putting into a system, then it's going to become more disordered, right? And this is proof, or this is proof why you can't have evolution, because there's no ordering mechanism. If you're going to have a system that has energy being put into it, it's going to only it's only going to become more disordered unless there's an ordering mechanism. And so that the idea of an ordering mechanism, this appeals to the reason why we do have life on Earth and the reason why we do actually exist, because there was and this is where I have a quickly this is a because it's a great topic, right? So in the same way that a bird flying or lifting something doesn't violate gravity, designed mechanisms can work against entropy by harnessing energy to increase order within a system. For example,
Yeah,
a
that's
fridge.
exactly what. That's exactly what I'm saying. That they use a
Yeah.
low entropy energy source and dissipate that into high entropy energy.
So, for example,
That's how cars work. That's how fridges work. That's how your body works. Like you eat food
yeah,
that contains low entropy energy,
yeah.
and you dissipate that energy as as high entropy energy. Yeah.
And so let me ask you, my friend, what's the similarity between a car or a fridge and a human body? What do they all have in common?
They extract. They are like far from equilibrium systems regarding
They are
thermodynamics.
they are designed.
Oh, but there are also other things that are also far from equilibrium, and you would say they are not designed. Like, for example, a hurricane is a far from equilibrium system. It extracts it extracts low entropy heat from the ocean and dissipates that as high entropy into the stratosphere. That's how hurricanes are powered. Would you say?
Wouldn't you
Would you say
also
that hurricane?
say
Would you
that
say that hurricanes are designed? Would you say that hurricanes are designed?
wouldn't you also say like crystals are low entropy?
Yeah, You agree that the ice crystals are also low
ice
entropy states.
crystals.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
don't
I'm
agree
happy to
that.
talk about.
Okay,
I'm
but
happy to
that's
talk
not
about
a
ice
design
crystals.
thing, and that is.
But can we use the hurricane example, because it's a much better example, because it's a far from equilibrium. Like ice crystals are equilibrium states, but hurricanes are far from equilibrium. They continue dissipating the energy, basically.
Well, let me just talk about ice crystals quickly, because I'm not really
All right.
sorry, I'm just not sure about your hurricane example, but maybe if we can go on to that after.
All
But very quickly, because I understand the argument about ice crystals, right? You say, well, here I am claiming that plants were designed and that life is designed, and that's why it's a design mechanism, right? And that's why it can harness energy from the sun and then and to lower entropy within a system. And so when you talk about ice or crystals, there's a similar thing happening. So we witness when we look at ice forming, right? We're witnessing an increase of order. But why are we witnessing that increase of order, right? We witness that increase in order because of a change in temperature, and that change in temperature has an effect on the molecular structure of the molecule of water, right? So the molecule of water, as you all understand, has this intermolecular bonding forces. And so basically when the temperature moves down, because we can kind of think of temperature as molecular kinetic energy. So when the molecular kinetic energy, when the temperature goes down to a certain point, those intermolecular bonding forces become more pronounced, and that's where we have the structures form. But my claim, it's part of the same argument, is that water itself, the water molecule, is designed, was created.
Well, okay, listen, if you're going to get to that point, like, you're basically saying that everything in the universe is designed. So everything is designed, nothing is non-designed. So
well, that's what the Bible says.
Well, then that's not an argument. I'm sorry. Like, if you're going to say, like, everything that exists is evidence for my position, then, well, you don't really have a position.
How would you say, like, if you want to argue that something is designed, then you would have to propose like a way to differentiate design from non-design. But then you have basically blow up any discussion regarding it, because everything is by definition designed if it exists at all, basically.
Yeah. And then all you've done is you've just proposed a slightly more profligate hypothesis than what we've proposed, which is that everything exists without design.
No.
And another thing, you mentioned cars. So cars are much better designed than human beings are. So if you buy a car, I can give you an example. If you buy a car, you're gonna have headlights. So there will be a wire going from the battery to the headlights, and it will go there in the shortest way possible. Whereas that in humans, not so much.
Are you referring to the vessel, the blood artery?
Oh, I think he's thinking of the vagus nerve that goes from your brain to your larynx.
Laryngeal nerve.
Yeah, but it goes from like up here way down to your heart and then comes back.
That's just one thing. That's just one thing. We also, for instance, on a car, we wouldn't put I don't know what it's called in English, the boom to put your horses on. You wouldn't put that on a car because a car isn't horse drawn, so you wouldn't put it on there, right? Whereas in humans, we still have things that previous animals needed, but humans no longer need, like tail, for instance.
Yeah, I think these are common misconceptions to do with the nerve specifically. What I understand about that is that you're talking about, I mean, we look at it from a human that's developed, but the thing is that design of a human has to be applicable at all stages of human development.
It could be.
And so, yeah, and that just one example. And to
no,
do
I mean,
with
you
your
don't need to. You don't need to wrap it around the heart at any point in development, or the like what becomes the heart. There's at no point in development when that's necessary.
And it's pretty evidential. It's pretty evidential in what we see in life how that happened, and the only good explanation for that happening is evolution, because you can't, once the nerve runs from A to B, you can't just in a subsequent animal cut it and then have it no longer loop around an artery. So once this evolves, it'll stay in that same place. And if humans were designed, then that wouldn't be the case. It's even worse in a giraffe.
Look, this area can get messy. I can address certain things, but specifically, I'm interested in the core kind of scientific area around entropy and how that conflicts with
Sure.
evolution.
So let's go back to entropy then.
But
I'm still
in terms of
curious
those-
how entropy affects evolution, because I don't think you've made that.
Well, we have established that far from equilibrium systems like hurricanes can persist or come about. Like hurricanes come about, but the reason why they can come about is because they and they can maintain themselves for some period of time because they extract low entropy from the environment and dissipate it as high entropy.
And my example was so yeah, as I'm reading here, like yes, crystals have low entropy. The formation or the formation of the crystal increases the entropy of the surroundings.
Yes,
So that's like
when water freezes, that creates heat, basically latent heat. Yes.
Mhm.
And that is the high entropy heat that's dissipated when the water freezes. Yes.
But the point that we were trying to make is like, earlier we were talking about, or I think you took issue with us saying, or with Nestle saying that like you could go from high entropy to low entropy in like these systems. And so our response was to point to examples in which this occurs. And it seemed that your response to that was, well, the universe is designed, which doesn't really deal with the issue that we were bringing up. Because if it's all designed,
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
then the original issue that you brought up is moot, right?
Yeah, that's it. Look, I think that's a great point to bring up.
Couldn't we just
and
say
that-
evolution, or like God just allowed evolution to occur because he imbued the universe with the properties that would prevent it from reaching entropy?
If everything's
there's many
designed,
problems with that.
evolution could be designed by God in order to make up for the diversity of life on our planet.
It just seems if you're going to go down the route of, well, God imbued the properties of the universe such that, going from high to low entropy is possible, then, I mean, that seems to, is like, then, okay, then you do allow evolution, I guess, because, like,
No.
you can't have it both ways, right? It can't be both that this doesn't happen, that we can't go from high to low, but also it is possible because the universe is designed.
Let me explain.
Okay.
So I think it's a great, I haven't had that brought up to me before. This kind of argument that, because obviously I am arguing from the position that the universe was designed and was created, right?
Right.
And so I think it's a good point to clarify that about, well, how do we differentiate between something that's designed and not designed, right?
Mhm.
How and so the key thing here is that it's able to work against entropy, right? Because entropy, we know, basically dead things, right, are governed by the law of entropy. Like you look at your room.
As a designer,
over time,
I have to disagree with that. I'm a designer. The hallmark of design is simplicity. If you design something, you have no nothing there that isn't necessary to the whole thing.
And as Nestle said earlier, that's the highest entropy, right? The highest entropy is these like very complex.
It's like if you have for example, if you have a file on your computer and it is non-compressible, it is a very high entropy, high information content, basically. But if you have a very repetitive pattern in your file, then it can be compressed because it's a very low information content. Yeah.
The way I would frame that from an engineering perspective is the highest form of design is functional simplicity, right? So because simplicity itself, like a rock is simple, but a rock can't give birth, or a rock can't create music.
I agree with that definition.
I do want to. Well, let's let him keep going, John.
Oh, sorry. No, what were you saying?
No, I was saying go ahead.
Well, the names, is it Peter, or is it, who's the one with the hat?
Yeah, Peter.
That's Peter.
Peter? Yeah, because you had a good question, I think, about what. Well, I mean, what's your kind of or what would be your question to me about entropy and evolution, about why they would conflict, or your understanding of that, or
So what if I'm unlike Neslick and Jackson, I'm not a biologist. I'm just a simple YouTuber with pretty low education. I'll be honest about that. So when you say entropy affects evolution, then what we should see over time is that things get worse. So humans can no longer maintain life. Animals couldn't. Plants couldn't, because everything would basically be corrupted, and life would end as a whole. Because if your food source dies out, you die out, and that's not what we see.
a few examples that come to mind is extinction or degradation. Because you're right, the biological reality is that things do tend towards that we are, like, biology does tend towards
Survival.
disorder, right?
Survival.
Yeah. Well, for example, sicknesses or illnesses or degenerations, extinctions. These are what we experience. We don't experience really the opposite, which is what evolution really tries to claim. But
We
I
don't
mean, I'm
experience
trying to
like
get to
new
the.
species coming into existence, because
We
we
s-
do certainly experience that.
Even better, we see. So let's, for instance, in Africa, there's a group of people who are resistant to AIDS. In Italy, there's a group of people who have a mutation where they're pretty much none of them get heart attacks,
Well,
heart
heart
issues.
disease.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Right.
this is all of this is a product of evolution working against illnesses, working against death, pretty much making sure that the species can survive. So that's what evolution works towards, apparently, without being guided
Yeah.
by
So
anything.
if I could, I mean, if I could just quickly clarify. So that's where I think we're touching on we're conflating evolution theory with natural selection. So obviously,
No.
if there's going to be a population that dies out due to certain things, then the remaining population will be resistant to that, right? That's natural selection. That's
Which is
basic,
a
well
factor
understood.
in
It's a
evolution.
form.
Is
It's
a
a form of
mechanism
evolution.
of evolution.
Yeah.
Yes.
hmm
No, well, the problem is, so I guess this might come to the heart of the issue, is that there's two fundamentally opposing things, right? So evolution theory claims that over time, that there's an information gain, right? Fundamentally, at a information
You would have to
level.
define no one,
No.
but you would have to define what information means, and we kind of tried to hash that out earlier, and it
Yeah.
was I don't think we got any definition of information.
Well, it's quite a simple concept, isn't it?
Not really. No, I've had this conversation many times with creationists. And I've never had a definition of information that encompasses like actual genes or their products.
Yeah.
And I've had this
So
conversation
I'm
very
sure.
many
Basically,
times.
basically a
Okay, well,
question
I'm
I would
sure
like.
you
Basically,
understand
a
that.
question I would like to ask is, like, for example, you have two genomes, genome A and genome B. How would you determine which one has more information and which one has less information, or whether the information content is equal? And how do you measure it? Basically, yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I would like to hear.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's very simple questions, right? Like, these are all kind of information. Like, we can look at them from an information or data perspective, right? But my concern is really the heart. Like, I think if we're going to go into too complex of a
You
situation,
didn't answer the question.
Yeah.
You just kind of sideswiped it. You didn't answer it. Like I think it's a fair question, right? This is if you want to say that evolution is about gaining information, then we need to define what information means. And Nestlig's question of if you look at two genomes, how do you define which has more versus which has less information in it? Like I think that's a very
yeah, okay,
important question. Yeah.
okay. I mean, if to be able to answer your question, will you give me one kind of? Can we agree on one thing, or can we find a basic or a common assumption? Okay, can we
All right.
compare? Yeah, okay. So can we compare genetic, or can you, like, the genome? Can you say that that's, for example, a computer code. Okay, so can we say that let's say a computer script that is 1,000 lines long, which one, let's say two computer scripts of information that are 1,000 lines long, which one has more genetic information? Would that be a fair representation of your question?
Well, that's not.
Like
Well,
I- like-
genetic
like
information
I-
is not
I-
computer information, right? These are two different things.
Obviously.
I'm feeling you're going down a road that is problematic, but I will let you continue on with your now. Like I suspect you want to say that
It might be good to let him.
I'm suspecting.
It might be good to let him have that and finish his argument.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
suspecting.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Go ahead then. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, just for the sake of being on the same page, because obviously they're not the same, but there are similarities. And so, for example, you're talking about, well, which has more information? Is that your question? If we're going to talk about,
Yes.
let's say, two.
Yeah. How do you distinguish between the two? So
Right.
Like a genome A and genome B. Which one has more, or how do you, or maybe they are equal.
how do you determine which one has more and which one has less? How do you determine
or
that?
the same? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's look at it a few of the parts of this problem. Okay. So a few of the parts of this problem is that we can look at. It's kind of about what level you look at it at, right? So at one level, we're looking at the raw information, all the bits, right? And so but we've already agreed that they both have the same amount of information at that level
Of
of perspective.
nucleotides. You're talking about nucleotides, orbits.
No, he's mistaken. He's mistaken.
nucleotides, yeah.
So you don't have two that have the same amount. You have
I see what
two.
he's saying.
You just have
Yeah,
two
he's saying they're the same
genomes
length.
that have a different amount of genes. How do you determine which one has the more information as opposed to the other, or if they are equal?
Well, he was saying, he was asking if they're like, because he's saying they're the same length, right? They're the same number of nucleotides, or if we're talking about computer code, same number of bits. I see what you're saying, John.
Yeah. So we're agreement on that. That's
They're the
part
same
of the
length.
assumption.
They're the same length. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, so very simply, I mean, for example, you brought up a great example earlier about the zip programs that can compress. Yeah. And so, for example, imagine one file that was compressed and one file that wasn't. They're different files containing different information, but they're both the same size, right? But one is a compressed file and one isn't compressed file. And so when the compressed file becomes uncompressed, it's has the same amount of information.
Now we're talking
once
about
it's
two different.
uncompressed,
Now we're talking about two different types of files, whereas we're talking about two genomes which aren't different. They're both a genome.
Yeah, that was kind of my.
So now we're getting into an analogy that doesn't really work, because a zip file and a text file are very different.
Well, that's kind of my problem with like
can be
going
coded to be a
to
zip file.
computer programming, right? Because the nucleotide sequence of the genome is obviously not computer code, right? So if we're looking at like, if you can just compress the raw data that makes it up on a computer file or something, like that's one thing, okay. But if we're looking at an actual genome, which is composed of nucleotides, right? How would we?
There's no compression. There's no compression in a genome.
Right. There's no compression happening in a genome.
Yes. Well,
also you are technically wrong. That like compressed files do have lower bits, and that's the whole point, because they take up less space on your computer, right? That's the whole point.
Yeah, but let's not go there, because that's
All right. Okay, let's move on.
That analogy doesn't work, so we don't have to go there even.
Let's go back to the original question. Genome A and genome B, the same length of nucleotides. How do we know which one is more?
Both uncompressed, because there's no compression in a genome.
Well, I mean, so basically my what I was trying to say was that it depends about what perspective you're looking at it, right? And so you've already agreed that both genomes are the same length, but one genome can be coding for multiple attributes, right? And so a genome can code for more genomes, of course, right? And so this is why, I mean, this is an interesting topic. It's talking about the nature of information and how we look at information. But I think just I'm really interested in just staying simple. and just because this is a simple topic at a certain level, right? Because fundamentally what we're saying is we're looking, like, you guys live in the world, right? You wake up every day and you live in a world where you can observe the laws of entropy, right? You observe the laws of gravity already. We see everything sitting on the ground, but you observe the laws of entropy, right? When you wash your dishes, you have to work. You have
I
to
feel
put
like you're
work.
not answering the question.
There,
I'm
he
sorry.
didn't. No, he
I'm
didn't answer the
sorry.
question. At any rate, it's been another hour. I do want to thank you, John, for coming on. It's very kind of you to spend your hour with us. We really appreciate it.
Yes.
We're coming up, we're at our 2 hour mark, and I've got to pee really bad. So we're gonna cut the show.
Jackson,
I do want to thank.
I do want to say this, and this is not just for John, it's also for Ben, who we had earlier. I really appreciate you guys coming on because we spent about a week, I think, trying to get people to come on the show, which didn't work. And so having two people on and having been able to at least have a conversation for 2 hours, that is great. And so we really do appreciate you guys coming on because it also, because it seems unfair, there's 3 of us and there's 1 of you, and I get that. This is why I like going on Christian channels, because that's where I'm in the minority, and I really like to experience what other people have to experience when they come on our channels. So I do appreciate it. So even if we disagree on pretty much everything we talked about, keep in mind that that's honestly appreciation.
We do appreciate you for coming on, John,
and for being cordial, being cordial, because we have come across, sadly, as you may have as well, people who just tend to like to have it evolve into a dumpster fire, which is completely unnecessary.
Well, I mean, if I can just say something as my final thing, is where we have to have a love for what's true, okay? And this is why I think through the scientific discipline, there is the tools there to understand that there is a truth, and this is what I just would like to say to you all, is that there is a truth and there is a hope, and you don't have to die without this hope, okay? So God bless you all.
Okay.
Before you go, I have one thing to mention. Like, if you would like to, we can discuss this further on, like, maybe you're familiar with that, but the peaceful science forum. You can that many different people, like from creation side and from intelligent design side, and also from
Nestle,
discussing together.
We're all on Twitter. I can create a group DM and have all of us in there, so we can.
It's also like it's much more convenient to discuss on a forum, a structured forum, than on Twitter, because Twitter is very
I mean that's where you can at least agree to go to
a DM group, and you guys.
All right, we can do DM. Okay. We can do DMs. Yes. All right. Thank you.
Yep. So you guys will work it out in DMs, and then you can talk on peaceful science or something. Well, anyway, all right. Thank you everybody for watching. I really appreciate everybody in the live chat. Thank you for hosting, Peter. As always, I really appreciate all the work.
Anytime.
You do. And thank you, Nestle, for being here, and thank you, John, again for coming on. And I will see everybody next time. So bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.